Welcome to Life and Love Nuggets, where licensed therapists Brent and Janis Sharp share how you can thrive in your life, your love, and your relationships.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to Life and Love Nuggets. We're so glad you're with us. We've been talking about parents and adult children, kind of both ways. How do we respect and appreciate each other? How do we make transitions when our kids grow up and become adults? How do adult children manage parents? And again, how do parents manage their adult kids? Because everybody wants to be in relationship with each other. Everybody wants to be close and connected.
Yes.
There's a desire for that. I mean, that would be our ultimate desire, you know, and obviously there's some that like, I want to get away from them, but
And some that may need to get away from them.
yeah. And so we've been talking about that, and we were looking at just some of the ways that some of the dynamics involved in that, and we're going to kind of continue that today. So let's
Primarily
jump in.
today, what we're going to talk about is how not to be like your parents. We always cringe when those insurance commercials come on about, oh no, that's what your parents would do.
Yes.
Who does that sound like? That sounds like Dad.
Right.
But I do want to say there is nothing wrong with having a lot of pillows on the couch. I think they're totally wrong. That is not a generational thing. It's good to have a lot of pillows on the couch.
And I think it's helpful to count down for for a family photo so everybody can be ready. Oh dear.
Oh dear.
We're expressing our generation here a little bit, aren't we?
Yes, there's some cringe-worthiness in some of this. But we want to look at some of the things that impact our parenting. And a lot of it is our own parents, our childhood, but even our parents' childhood.
Yeah.
Understanding a little bit more about them so that we can relate to why they parented me the way they did because of their cultural influences at the time and some of their experiences.
Yeah, we spend our lives working with relationships and trying to help create connections. What are ways that how can we respect and honor each other, whether that's in marriage, whether in family, just all kind of relationships. And one of the key factors we have found is obviously we're all different. And we've joked about this before that, you know, by adulthood, we all think that the way that we see things is accurate. And again, if you agree with me, then you're a very bright person. Love to hang out with you. The minute you disagree with me, well, I think I'm right. You're different, so you must be wrong. And we need to fix that. I mean, this is just human.
Yeah.
And so one of the keys, if this is how we are, we don't get to live in somebody else's brain. We don't get to know exactly what they've experienced. But yet we want to be connected with them. Mm-hmm. And so one of the keys to that is the level of respect that we have for them. Whether we're talking about personalities, whether we're talking about gender differences, whether we're talking about environmental influences, the more we can see through their eyes and understand how they experience life, we have a much better empathy for them. We have much more mercy for them, and we generally will move towards them. And so we're going to look at just some generational differences. You know, we weren't born in a vacuum. Certainly our family of origin has a huge impact on us, but so does the time and the culture that we were born in. It impacts our marriages, our financial decisions, our parenting, so many things. And sometimes it helps to look at what was normal, quote, normal, for our parents' generation, and even beyond, or before and beyond, and what is normal for ours, to understand that, oh my gosh, we were raised in different generations and had all these different experiences that formed us. And
our kids are in a totally different generation.
Absolutely.
And so they have influences that we didn't have.
Yeah. So every generation had different influences, trends, major life events, music, education, technology that actually formed us. And so the more we can understand that, so we're going to kind of take a stroll through history. I mean, last 100 or so years, what we've seen as the key components of each of these generations, and what can we learn from that about maybe our great-grandparent or our grandparent or parent or child, that gives us greater insight and greater awareness of who they are.
It really helps us understand some of the reactions they had when we were growing up, or some of the things that were very important to them growing up that were like, why was that a big deal?
Yeah.
So I think about, it's hard for us to imagine now that Elvis Presley was banned as being indecent because his music was going to corrupt the young generation.
That leg shaking.
Whew, pretty crazy. It was bad. But I remember when we were in high school, there was a song by Larry Norman that's Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? It was a Christian song, but it had a beat.
Yeah.
And so people in the generation before us had a lot of fears of people having music with a beat. And I have to confess, Brent, I was raised listening to rock and roll.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And so I think that explains why I'm the wild child that I am today.
Right. And one of the most significant things I remember in the transition with my parents' generation and ours was just hair.
Oh, yeah.
The length of hair was like, you would have thought that was the most significant issue on the planet is how long your hair was for boys.
Yes, and we can't tell boys from girls these days.
Exactly. Again, if we understand a little bit about that previous generation, we have a little bit more empathy and understanding of that rather than they were just weird.
So really, it helps us have more compassion for them.
Yes.
It helps us see where they were from, and it gives us more compassion.
Yeah. So usually we think of generations in terms of birth years. When people refer to generations, they're thinking about people who were born around the same time, usually within a 20-year span.
Right.
And so we're going to talk about each of those kind of spans. We tend to put these people born around the same time because their lives have been shaped by the same historical events and critical life events. I remember if we get with people our generation, we all can talk about, do you remember when Kennedy was shot? We remember where we were, when President Kennedy was shot. And I was in fourth grade. They rolled a TV into our classroom. And if we're around people of our generation, we can share that story. Everybody remembers where they were at that moment. And so it's things that connect us within that generation and things that other generations simply don't have. And so we're going to look at that. Of course, there's all kinds of things that contribute to who we become, but there are some things that are common in each generation. It's not to stereotype anyone. We're not passing judgment. It's to help us get understanding. That's the whole point. It's a greater, it's walking in the shoes of another, and the more we can understand that, again, we have a greater sense of empathy and mercy and respect for them. And as you listen to these, you may see that you have some of the characteristics even from the generation before or after, depending on kind of where you were at, on the edge. I know my dad was born like right at the year one was beginning, but he was an infant there, you know. So his siblings were born in the previous generation. And so just kind of listen. This is just to kind of hear and let the uniqueness of these kind of soak in and give us some insight.
Yeah. I think whatever your generation is, we pretty much all agree that the next generation is just not doing it right. I mean,
absolutely.
Every single generation has been young people these days. It's just not like we
what
were.
Are people doing?
Yeah, I just wasn't like that. I don't know why they're acting like
these
that.
Days.
So we're going to start with the greatest generation. Their birth years were from 1901 to 1927, and they had a lot of major events in their life. They went through the Great Depression, World War II, jazz and swing music, which was pretty wild when it first came out too. The Roaring 20s, when people kind of just, things were so bad during World War I that they just kind of broke loose and did whatever they wanted to do.
Through, born in World War I, and then as adults or teenagers or adults were had
World War
experienced World War II.
Yeah.
So they had two of these huge.
Yes, and they went through the stock market crash.
Yeah.
And all of the panic that occurred because of that. Interesting, they also went through the golden age of Hollywood, when movies were glamorous, probably to help distract from all the
Absolutely.
darkness of what they had
The
going
fantasy
on
had to get
in their lives.
outside of that, going to the movie theater, and so we could forget
Yes.
all the difficulties that
And
we're
find a
experiencing.
place that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. My parents were in this generation. Their parents went through World War I and the pandemic, the first pandemic.
Yeah.
Yes. Which I think had more of an impact on us as a culture than what we actually realize. And when you think about it, a lot of these people were maybe second generation from immigrants. A lot of their parents or grandparents were new immigrants to the United States. So they had a lot of things to deal with. The greatest generation grew up in the Depression. Some of them ended up going to war, but all of them lost friends or family members to the war. They were very frugal. They kind of had this thought of, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so we better plan ahead. You know, I think it's fair to say that some of them had the mindset, as my mom did, don't get too excited about this because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, I just felt
Don't
like she
get your
was
hopes up.
always, and it felt like she was kind of putting a damper on everything. You know, we couldn't rejoice, we couldn't celebrate because, well, something else. And we thought, well, she's kind of crotchety, you know.
What?
but the reality is that's her life experience.
Right.
It was good things, but then there's tragedy ahead, and so.
And even though she was born in 1926, they didn't have electricity and running water in her house.
Yeah.
It was around, but she wasn't raised with that. And she was raised in a one-room schoolhouse. So a lot of differences just in that short period of time.
Yeah.
One of the things that you've probably heard people from this generation say, or at least they heard from their parents, the expression of use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. They didn't like waste. They were going to make things do no matter what. Now, the interesting thing is we're seeing this now in millennials, and they are being more responsible in a lot of ways with
Not
buying,
wasting. Yeah.
Right, not wasting, buying used clothing, just looking for some ways where they're not consuming so much like we all did. But that was part of the World War II generation. They gave birth to the baby boomers, which we are. And they're the grandparents of Gen X and millennials. This generation was all about raising their families to value hard work. They knew about loss, they knew about hard times, and they were very realistic and very pragmatic. It really influenced their parenting style because they wanted their children to work hard. The greatest generation had very large families after World War II. So there's a lot of us baby boomers, which is affecting the economy. It's affecting a lot of things. I always say that's why they have our music from high school on in stores, our generation's music, because if we're happy, we'll buy more. And we have more disposable income than other generations. They did whatever they had to do to make ends meet and support multiple children. So it wasn't unusual for them to work a couple jobs, to scrimp and save. They ended up with the skills to survive and to prosper. They put a lot of money in the bank, and all of that was really emphasized to their children. But because it was a time of survival, there wasn't much of a place for emotions.
Right.
You just didn't worry about emotions. You got on and you did what you had to do. So there wasn't a lot of empathy.
Yeah.
Because they experienced loss, they became very stoic. This happens, step up and do what you have to do.
Yeah. So again, just understanding that, that stoic, not really paying attention to their own feelings, not really being able to be empathetic towards others. We need to be empathetic towards that.
Yes.
And so I remember working with couple of men from this generation, and they were, one was dealing with some anger, another one was dealing with some depression, and I was trying to get them to kind of tap into their feelings, as anger is a secondary emotion. I was trying to help them understand, and they just looked at me like I'd lost my mind, you know. It was just hard. Now they were able to eventually tap a little bit there, but that just it wasn't in their vocabulary whatsoever.
Well, and they also were more likely to tell you what you were doing wrong than what you were doing right. But that was out of love.
Yeah.
It's like, I want you to do well, so I need to tell you, I need to point out what's wrong.
Yep.
Where we tend to be more like, I want to point out what's right, and then maybe I can help point out what's wrong.
And my parents were slightly younger. They were born kind of just into the next generation, which we call the silent generation, 1928 to 1945. My dad was born 1929, so the year the stock market crashed. Now, he was a baby.
So it wasn't his fault.
Definitely wasn't his fault. But he also, wouldn't have been aware of it, for some time. But stories he would tell about just, again, they were frugal also, and because of that, and his dad worked several jobs. I mean, they're just, so that's just
hardworking.
Part of the story. Major events in their lives: the fall of the Nazis, the rise of the nuclear bomb, was something that they were very aware of. And of course, that then impacted our generation, boomers, because we remember having drills where we'd get under our desk and in
case of nuclear war, which would make such a difference.
Yeah, make such a difference being under your desk.
They had stronger desks back then.
Didn't know much about it in the beginning there. And people in our neighborhood having bomb shelters. And so, again, in fact, affects that. Communism was the enemy. And so I see that we see a little bit, and this isn't necessarily true of just the older generation, our parents' age, but sometimes it is more difficult for them to hold differing opinions as valuable because they were raised in a right and wrong world. There are good people, bad people, there are scary people, and there was a identified enemy, the McCarthy era, the Cold War. Their parenting style, the silent generation, was known for working within the system rather than fighting the system. They followed the rules. They parented quietly and without doing anything that called attention to them. They seemed to keep their heads down and did what they had to do. They're known for becoming parents at the youngest ages of all generations. They married and gave birth as young adults. My parents married my dad was 19 and had their first child a year later. He was actually in the service at the time, came home on leave and produced a baby. And they were also the generation that popularized divorce. Divorce really hadn't happened before then. Many of the silents raised their children to be seen and not heard. So this idea of children speaking up and having a voice and parents valuing that and listening to that was just kind of unheard of. And so even this is maybe some of the grandparents in our, generation now. And so how they interact with their grandchildren and so forth is they're just, again, they just come from a different place.
Don't be loud, be ladylike.
So those are some of the influences of that generation.
And then the next one is the baby boomers. I know quite a few of those.
Yeah.
The birth years are from 1946 to 1964. And again, we are a very large generation. The 1960s we went through was very countercultural.
Pushing back at all the rules where our parents followed all the rules. Now the whole culture is pushing back at the rules. So you can imagine the conflict that happened between these two generations. It's
absolutely
huge just because of what was happening culturally.
Yes. We went through the Vietnam War. We also had a higher standard of living than our parents did. And I remember parents saying things like, well, we just want you to have more than what we had.
Yeah.
And now they're saying that some of the next generations may not have as much as their parents had. But that was a big deal then, was that we were supposed to get ahead because our parents worked so hard.
Sacrificed.
Yeah. There were higher educational standards. We went, did I say the Vietnam War? I said the Vietnam War. The civil rights movement was huge.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of that on TV, whether we were actually in a parade or not, or a protest, I should say. We saw a lot of that on TV. And it was also the time of the Jesus movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I came to know the Lord through the Jesus movement, and it had a big impact on me. Watergate, it wasn't as startling for some other people, but I was out of the country when Watergate broke, and gosh, I thought that the United States was never going to be the same again if our president lied.
Yeah.
You know, it really was a shift.
That was shocking to us. Yeah.
It really was. It was.
And now we kind of come to expect that, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. So the parenting style of the baby boomers, they're the parents of the late Gen Xers and the millennials. They raise their children with a focus of wanting the best for them. Making sure their kids went to college was a big thing for them. It was very important for them. We also lived through hippies, as you mentioned earlier, long hair. There was a sense of change, and we don't have to be like the people before us. There was a Monkees song. Remember, Hey, Hey, we're the Monkees?
Yep.
There was a Monkees song that says, we're the new generation and we've got something to say.
Yeah.
It was also the time that we said, don't trust anyone over 30. That went away when that generation started turning 30.
Right.
It was a time when the role of women in the workplace was just emerging. It was just the time when women were starting to become in upper levels of management instead of just secretaries. And when I was growing up, my family expected me, they wanted me to go to college, but they expected me to be either a nurse, a secretary, or a teacher. Those were really the only options. And I dropped out of typing class because I was really bad at it. And yes, we actually did have a whole class for typing.
Yeah, that's right.
Now everybody knows how to type.
Right.
And they were like, well, what's going to happen? I mean, you know, after you get married, if your husband dies, you're not going to be able to support yourself if you're not one of those. So it was really that idea of this is what women are supposed to do, and you don't go outside of that. I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I think it was a little unusual for our generation, at least the people that we were around, for both of us to be going to grad school at the same time.
Sure, yeah.
I think the idea was more the woman worked as a secretary or a nurse or a teacher to put their husband through grad school so that they had the higher education.
Yeah, and so I don't know if you want me to even share this story or not, but
we'll see.
Here we go. But this is a little bit hard to understand maybe for some our current generation, but I still remember the day where you were working in a professional setting, had several people reporting to you. Again, you were in grad school or finished, I can't remember yet, and had many men working for you. And some of them were saying, you're stealing our job. You need to be home having babies.
Yes.
And this wasn't that. I mean, I know we're old.
This was the early 80s.
I know we're old,
yeah.
but again, that generation, that's what they were pushing, just starting to push back.
Yes.
But it's just starting to,
yes.
And it took a long time. Obviously, we're still working on
I
that.
also had men working for me that were making more money than I was, even though I was their supervisor. And when I challenged it, it was, they have families to support.
Right.
You have Brent to support you, so you don't need this money. It was just so interesting.
Just weird.
Yeah, it's weird how it changed. I still find that I have little twinges every once in a while when one of our grandkids are sick and our daughters have to stay home. I kind of have this panicky feeling of, they always stereotype women as not being as good at their job because they have kids. And it's like, no, wait, it's a whole different world now.
Right.
They understand that at work. It is more acceptable now. In terms of the church, I talked about the Jesus movement, but hymns were starting to be replaced with more contemporary choruses. And so the church was changing. It was becoming more casual. It was the rise of the charismatic movement. Vatican II also happened. So there was huge reform in the Catholic Church. It was really a good time or a great time of excitement and revival and rebirth in the churches. But, and this is what the kids always laugh about with me, there was a rise in the, it gained more attention, alternate religions and witchcraft. There was more attention paid to it. So we saw more people on talk shows that were witches or druids or, were participating in some different religion. And so it made us as Christians have more of a, I need to protect you
more
from
fear.
that's going on. So again, I've said it before, but I apologize for not letting you trick or treat. But it really was a thing back then. Our demographic couldn't be any more different than our parents' demographic. And so our parenting was different than that. I had somebody years ago when I had little kids comment on how I raised my kids or how I talked to my kids. And I remember saying, yeah, I see kids as people. Isn't that weird? But it was the shift between the past generations viewing kids as somebody to be quiet and molded, and ours that's I see you as a person and I want to respect you as a person.
And talking to them and asking them a question and being interested in their response.
Yes.
Right. That's a big transition. Then the next is Generation X, aka Gen Xers or the MTV generation. Birth years 1965 to 1980. Major events in their lives, the AIDS epidemic, MTV culture, the video, music culture, the rise of video games and personal computers. The idea when we were in grad school in the early 80s, again, these people were born right in that, but the idea of personal computers was beyond belief.
Was science fiction.
I mean, we had on the college campus that we were going to, there was one computer building, had one mainframe computer that took up the entire basement. And we're like, how are you going to have that as a personal computer?
We don't have houses that big.
It made no sense. Title IX and the rise of girls' sports was a significant thing. Those that were born here were many of the heroes of 9/11. They were at that age when 9/11 happened. The rise of the internet, the .com bubble. People had multiple TV channels, cable.
And we were jealous because we only had 3 growing up if we were in a big city.
What is going on here? And again, they were more adults when 9/11 happened. It created this loss of safety, this great loss of safety in our culture. Terrorist things happened in other countries, but didn't happen here, since the bombing of Hawaii at that, in World War II, but it was always over there.
Yes.
And now it was here. So a loss of safety. Parenting style. Gen Xers tend to be all about it. So they're very involved, focused on learning about parenting, reading books on it, caring about work-life balance. That kind of became a thing. They understand the importance of individualism and tend to support their children's choices for different lifestyles more than past generations. Generation X is also a generation of volunteers and are very involved in their kids' development. At times, any of these things could cause a reaction to kind of get over-involved. The whole term helicopter parent came to be about this time as well.
The next generation that we're all familiar with are the millennials. Millennials' birth years are 1981 to 1996. And the major events in their life is they had a childhood with the internet.
With the internet.
They had cell phones as an accepted part of life, where we thought they were bizarre and like, wow, we have a phone we can carry around with us. That was an accepted part of life. Cyberbullying began. When kids started getting phones, they started texting. People are people, and they started being mean. There was the rise of social media. There was the Great Recession. And, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't think we've seen the impact of that yet. I've talked to some preschool teachers that have talked about babies born in the pandemic are responding differently than other children.
And of course, that's going to affect even the current generation. But these folks were becoming of age, in that time.
Yes. And they also experienced 9/11 as children.
Right.
So a lot of them were well aware of 9/11 and at least where they were when that happened. And we see in this generation more of a deconstruction of their faith. They're questioning more things that we kind of assumed or we took for granted. We could go into that another time. But their parenting style is they're having fewer kids and they're less likely to feel like they need to be married in order to have kids. That was unheard of when we were young. Technology, the internet, and social media are the major influencers in their lives as parents and in the lives of their children. We oftentimes see parents out to dinner with the kids having the screen in front of them, watching something through dinner. And I get really jealous because I could have used that when we had kids. But this is an open-minded generation of parents who are parenting in various styles that we didn't do in the generation before. They are more flexible in their parenting. They may have been the children of helicopter parents, so they're finding themselves to be naturally more free with their kids and to allow their kids to do some more things than what their parents might have allowed them to do.
Mm-hmm. And then the last group, Gen Z or Zoomers or iGen or post-millennials, they get all kind of names.
Whatever you want to call them.
Bless their hearts. 1997 to present, which is 27 years. I mean, this is quite a span.
Yeah, it is.
And some of the major life events, again, obviously are just happening, and so the ever-present internet.
Yes.
Where, it started in the previous generation, but it's just everywhere. You can carry all basically the information known to man in your pocket in this little phone. And that just was unheard of years ago. Well, this is kind of normal for them. I remember the times where I'd ask my kids a question. They go, well, just a second. They'd start Googling it. And I'd go, oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
It's just what they're used to. They never knew a life without cell phones, digital media. And of course, again, the COVID pandemic certainly affected them as children and teenagers. Changes in accepted sexual identities is huge. Young people as activists, standing up for the rights of others. I mean, it's just very prolific right now. This generation is seemingly much more acceptable of difference.
Accepting.
Yeah, much more accepting of difference. Whether that be religious difference, whether that be racial difference, sexual identity difference. It's kind of natural for them, and oftentimes because they know it's not just a them group that other generations have kind of been prejudiced against. Oh, those people.
Yeah.
Because things are much more open, it's like, well, John, he's my best friend, and whatever it is, whether it's a religious difference or a sexual difference or whatever.
Well, and also we can't discount how they see things from all over the world. Millennials and the Zoomers, they have grown up seeing different cultures. I remember going to France in the 70s and people dressed differently. And then you'd see somebody and be like, oh, they're from Germany because they dress like that. Yeah. Now, everybody's wearing Gap.
Everybody looks alike.
Banana Republic, You go out in public and you can't really tell the difference until people talk, oftentimes. But they've seen all the events that are happening around the world, which we didn't have. We didn't get it for a while. And then it was newspaper or the news on TV. So they have a lot broader view of the world as a whole.
Yeah. And we've always known, politics has always been contentious forever. But they're just more impacted by the news now in their formative years.
Yes.
All the different conspiracy, this and that, and conflict, and this group and that group, and it's part of their formation. All of these different stressors, and so we see a lot more anxiety.
Yes.
Stress. Just some even greater levels of fear and stuff in this generation, and so. So again, we've just tried to look at a picture of each one of these without we could take deep dives into all these, and I'm not trying to overanalyze this, but
and it's okay if you don't fit in your generation.
Yes.
Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. This
Exactly.
is a general view.
yeah. But we wanted to lay this out in the midst of this conversation about different generations and parents and adult children and whatever those generations might be between us as kids with our parents, who are still alive, and that other generation, or us and our grown kids that are oldest is 40 now, to them. And, they're going to eventually start having teenagers and grown children pretty soon. And so the more we can appreciate the experience that they've had, what has formed all of us, I think it just helps us to have a little more grace, a little bit more listening rather than just immediate judgment. And which is probably one of the most important things we could do, period, is just listen and hear and not be so quick to judge and critique. That gives an opportunity for greater levels of connection between generations. So we're going to pick up this again next time. We got quite a bit more to talk about.
Next time we're going to talk about some practical ways for adult children and their parents to connect, to have positive relationships.
And things that both sides can do.
Yes.
Whether you're the parent or whether you're the adult children, how both of you can take some responsibility for your part of it that can move these relationships forward.
Yeah.
So for today, as always, go in peace. Blessings as you go.
The Life and Love Nuggets podcast should not be considered or used for counseling, but for educational purposes only.